Hey everybody, this is Edel here at Cole's Classroom, and today I want to talk to you guys about how to use flash modifiers, what they are, how you use them, when to use them. It's not anything to be afraid of, and it's something that really we should all be thinking about when we want to try and control that light. Natural light does not last 24 hours a day, and sometimes we've got to rely on some artificial lighting, and the more we understand how to control that lighting, the better our images can be as a result. All right, so let's get started. First off, when you think about what a flash modifier is, quite simply, it's anything that modifies the artificial light that you are producing, whether that be using a strobe, constant lighting, or a flash that sits on your hot shoe directly on your camera or off your camera. So, for example, here I have a standard speed light. It's just an on-camera flash with a hot shoe base that can plug directly into the camera, and I can also have it off camera using triggers, which isn't on this one right now. But basically, a modifier, you can increase the light, you can decrease the light. More often than not, we want to diffuse the light. And the larger the light source that you can create, the softer that light will be as a result. And there's lots of other creative things that we can do, such as changing the colour, changing the direction of where the light is going to hit our subject, etc. So when we think about any sort of flash modifiers, I am going to go through a list of them with you, but the most common one is what's known as a diffusion dome. And all speed lights, all on-camera flashes, come with a little plastic lid, I suppose, a little flip out cover, along with a white card, which is a bounce card. And basically, this is just like a little helper in that the light can hit this bounce card and then bounce out, and this is supposed to diffuse it. I'm going to be honest, I never use them because to me, again, the larger the light source, the softer the light. And that really doesn't do much apart from maybe wear down my battery a little bit faster. So the next step up from that, which is one that a lot of people have, is a plastic diffusion dome that sits directly over your speed light. It's quite snug usually. You don't get them that large in size. And they work a little bit better in that there's a little bit more room for the light to diffuse within that plastic dome, and then it's diffused out. You can then go to all different lengths. You can get massive speed rings, as they're called, where the speed light sits into it directly and it forms a massive ring around your camera, and as a result you can get those ring catch lights. I'm going to be honest, they're a little bit finicky and tricky to use sometimes just because they get in the way. And then there's one that I'm going to be talking about later. This is a favourite of mine. This is a mag mod called a mag sphere. And this basically just sits on top of your camera like that, and it does the same thing. The light comes up into it and it's diffused and a lot softer as a result. But there's lots that you can choose from. The reason why you use them, I've already covered. It's to soften that light, it's to make it much more flattering to any portrait that you're doing. And sometimes it's to push that light further out if it's not going where you want it to be. And again, I can go over some of the things that we can use to do that. It's to be creative sometimes. If you want to modify the light by adding different colours in, then you can do that using gels. And another common one is when to use it. Well, it depends. We all know that you can use your speed light to bounce off the ceiling or off a wall in order to get that diffused light. But what happens if you're in a situation where it's really high ceilings or dark walls? We aren't always in the perfect environment that we'd like to shoot in. So I think it's given that you should always have an option to use artificial lighting in case your natural lighting situation doesn't work, and also that you've covered your bases in case the indoor venue that you find yourself in means that there's not a lot to bounce light off. So you've got to have an alternative, and that's where flash modifiers can help. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to talk to you guys about the specifics in terms of the types of modifiers that you can get. So that's my little girl. So here, for example, we have softboxes. So the standard softbox, most people know it as rectangular. You can get them actually in all different shapes. You can get very long, thin ones, also known as strip lighting, which are really good for hair lights and things like that, or in the background, to light up the background. You can get round ones and octagonal shaped ones, which are known as octoboxes, which is what I'll be covering in another video. The square ones are used most often to replicate natural window light in terms of the catch lights that are in the eyes. And the octoboxes tend to imitate a beauty dish or standard studio lighting, where you get that round catch light in the eye. But there are alternatives. There are lots of different ones that you can use. Again, I've mentioned there's a ring softbox, which creates a ring light effect in the eye. And lots of different ways that those softboxes can be used. You can get them with silver insides, which is a harsher light. When light hits silver as opposed to white, it comes back a little bit harsher. If it was gold, for example, with a reflector, it would come out a little bit warmer. And the diffusion cover is the white cover on the outside, and that just means that as the light or the strobe enters the softbox, it flows around inside the softbox and then it's diffused to go out further through that white diffusion layer. So it gives just much more softer light, and because it's a larger space, that light is again going to be further softened by it. So that's our softboxes. Some of them are a little bit tricky in terms of the wires you've got to put in and the poles, but you can get ones that will pop up and they're much easier, I'll promise you that. So the next one on the list is, I've put down PLM. Now that's actually a trademark by Paul Buff, but actually what it means is it's a parabolic light modifier. So basically umbrellas, as opposed to softboxes, because I've put them all together here, umbrellas throw the light, they spread the light a lot further, whereas a softbox tends to give it a lot more direction, and it's a lot more narrow in terms of where the light's going to go. So if you want to light up a large group of people, an umbrella is the way to go as opposed to a softbox. But what a parabolic umbrella does is, rather than shoot through, which is the next one on the list there, where the light goes into it and it's diffused out, a parabolic umbrella, the strobe is facing into the umbrella. And again, you can get silver or white, depending on how harsh or how diffused you want that light. But when the strobe faces into the umbrella, it hits the back, it swirls around, and then it's going to be thrown backwards again. And you can get another diffusion panel for the front of that parabolic umbrella, which means not only is it hitting the back first and getting diffused at the back of the umbrella, it's then getting double diffused through the diffusion panel in the front. So they are most commonly used for things like newborns, also portraits. Again, the larger the better, because the light from a PLM is particularly soft. It's indirect light. All right, so I've covered the first three. We've got softboxes, PLMs, and umbrellas. Now, another final mention before I go on. In terms of the diffusion domes that you can get, there are so many on the market, but I did want to mention, apart from MagMod, which is my favourite, and I definitely would check those out. This is the MagSphere. You can also get a MagBounce, which is a lot higher, and there's a hole in it, and it throws out the light to hit a lot more people at once. And then this also comes with a MagGrid, which again, direction, it forces the light in a particular direction. But you could, another common two that I feel the need to mention is the Rogue Flash Bender, which is a large square piece of material, I suppose, like a white diffusion panel again, but with rods in it, and you can manipulate it and twist it how you want. So you can twist it around your flash to direct the flash into a thin beam of light. You can also just have it open wide against the back of your flash, and it will act as, again, another reflector. And you can twist the edges or pull it in so that you're directing how you want that light to go. So that's our Rogue Flash Bender. Again, great if you're in a venue where the walls are too far away or the ceilings are too high. And the other one that's similar to this MagSphere is the Gary Fong, and that's another one that's similar. It's a collapsible flash modifier that sits directly on top of your speed light. You just squeeze it closed, open it up, put it on. So definitely check those ones out as well. Okay, diffusion domes, check. Softboxes, PLMs, umbrellas, check. Next on the list, we have reflectors. I've already just touched on this. These are probably one of the cheapest flash modifiers you can get. You can normally get them in a pack. The hardest part of using a reflector is working out how to close it up and put it back into the case again. But usually they're double-sided. You'll have a white diffusion one, which is great in terms of even diffusing the sun if you're outside and you can have an assistant hold it. But they're also great to hold either to the side of somebody if there's a light coming in that you want to reflect to fill in those shadows on the face. Again, the silver one is a lot harsher, but necessary sometimes for that dramatic portraits, and the gold one is a lot warmer. But definitely it's good to have those in your kit. I always pack my reflector. It doesn't matter where I'm going, because you never know when it'll just come in handy. So definitely take a look at those. The next one is a beauty dish. Now a beauty dish works similar to a PLM, very common with portraiture, but basically the light goes into the beauty dish, and you'll notice that there's a small plate in the very front of the beauty dish. And what happens is the light will first of all hit that small plate, be reflected back into the dish, and then it will swirl around that larger space before then being thrown out. And again, it's that double diffused effect. You can also have another white diffusion panel on the front of it should you wish, and it just gives that really soft, flattering lighting. So it's another one that you can also try. The next one is a bit of a funny word. It's a snoot. And normally they're collapsible. They're usually made of rubber, though you can get some that are plastic. And again, a similar situation with the Rogue Flash Bender that I said you could bend it into a beam to create a beam of light. This one does the same thing. So it goes on the front of your flash. You can also put a grid on there so it's even more narrowed down. I'll talk about grids in a minute. But a snoot on the front of your flash will just really direct that beam of light to just a small area. So if you've got, for example, the key one that comes to mind is when I do a wedding party and I've got all the groomsmen and the groom, I like to get them in a triangular formation, the groom at the front, and when I shoot with a snoot, it will focus all of the light on the groom and then gradually just sort of fade out into blackness as it's going through the other groomsmen. So it really focuses that attention on the groom. That's an example of how to use a snoot. All right, getting to the end now. So grids. Grids come in all shapes and sizes. You get them for softboxes, not so much for umbrellas, but you can also get them for most of the diffusion domes that can go on to a speed light. So, for example, the grid that I have here is a small little one. With MagMod, they're magnetic, so they're quite handy that they just sort of click on in one place. But you can also get them, like in the image, that stretch across onto an actual softbox. It's also referred to a photo or lighting that is gridded, and basically it's a honeycomb effect. Not a honeycomb effect in terms of lighting, but the honeycomb shape forces the light directionally into a smaller area. So the lighting is a lot stronger and a lot more concentrated in a specific area. So you'll definitely have lots of fun playing around with those. Again, if you can get the ones that just Velcro on, it's much easier. So it's good to have a look around and see what you can find there. And finally, one that definitely is for us creatives, but it can really create some stunning results. The ones I've got here are small to match my mag sphere, but these are gels, so you get them in lots of different colours. They're sort of plastic, acetate sort of feel, and you put them onto your speed light and whatever on top, whatever diffusion panel that you're using, and it will, when the light comes out, it will then be coloured. So you can be really creative in terms of, for example, I love to use orange or blue or green lighting behind a bride and groom, or for models in a particular, say it's a grungy underground tunnel, I might use some blue and some green that are crossing over one another behind her. You can use it to light up different hair lights and catch lights or whatever, in rim lighting and things that's got a slight, it's a modern twist, I suppose, to traditional lighting. So you can have lots and lots of fun with gels. There's lots of things that you can do with them. and they're also worth checking out. Okay, in terms of where we are with flash modifiers, that's pretty much it. There's lots and lots to choose from. There is no right or wrong, it's just whatever is in your budget and whatever is in your vision that you want to create. In terms of creating dramatic portraits, I will be doing a separate video to show how I've created some of the types of portraits that you're going to see here. And the video that I will be doing is using my very good friend, Meet Jessie the doll, who's perfectly, well, as close to perfectly wrapped as you can get a doll. And she sits in a lovely bed here that's made from floccatis, etc. But for now, in terms of this particular scenario, I did want to give you a bit of a sneak peek of some of the things that's been covered there. So the image that you see in front of you, we've got 6 shots that were all taken on the same day using 2 speed lights inside of a larger octobox. It was again a mag mod system. And I was basically playing around to see what lighting effects I could get. So with these, the key thing to note here is how I've modified the flash can really give you lots of different results. The very first image that you see in the top left is the only one that has different settings compared to the rest. Because speed lights have a maximum shutter speed that they can reach to sync with your camera, I'm limited to a shutter speed of 1/200th of a second. I can't go any higher than that. Simply because if I go higher, then the flash will fire really quickly, but my actual shutter on my camera won't get open and closed in time for the flash to fire, because the speed of light is pretty fast. So by keeping it at 1/200th of a second or below, that means I'm not going to end up with a sync curtain, which is a black line that appears on your image. And you can get some speed lights and strobes that are high speed sync, which means you can go higher than 1/200th of a second. But with mine, it's a standard, so it's 1/200th. I tend to keep my ISO at either 100 or 200. When I'm using a PLM with a newborn, I will raise my ISO a little bit higher than that, because I want my ISO to be slightly higher and my flash power to be at its lowest to give the most natural, non-flashy look that I can get. And really the only thing that I play around with here is my aperture. So everything was shot with 1/200th of a second, and my aperture and the ISO was 100 for all of them. And apart from the top left, where you can see, this is my little boy, you can see that in the background you can make out some of the light in terms of the wall, and there's something else going on in the background with that bokeh. That was shot at f4, and as a result there was more ambient light coming into the scene, and that ambient light meant that you could make out some of the background. The rest of the images were all shot at f11, and as a result, because of shooting at f11, such a narrow aperture meant that the background was completely in darkness, and the subject was lit purely by the flash, depending on whereabouts I had it. Now, the difference in all of these is the one with the scones, or scones, depending on where you are in the world. And the reason you can see a bit more on that is they were shot in my kitchen during the daytime. So even shooting at f11, there was a little bit more light coming in through a window as well as my flash, which meant that there was a little bit more light around the scones as well. So in terms of anything else here, the flash was usually at 1/64th of a second. Sometimes I pushed it higher than that and I went to 1/32nd. In general, the lowest power flash is 1/128th, all the way up to 1/1, which is full power. And it goes up in increments within those stages. So you play around with it. My next video will talk to you a little bit more about that, but it gives you a bit of an idea about where to start with your settings. And in terms of where my actual octobox was when I was shooting, these little flash symbols is just to help you out. So the majority were to the left. So in the very first one, the octobox was probably about a foot and a half away from his face. In the scones one, it was above and to the left. and sort of shooting down. The third one, which is probably one of the most dramatic ones, so the third one, it was very close to his face. It was probably about half a foot maybe, so literally not a massive amount away from his face, but it was on a slightly lower power. But because he was so close to it, the closer you are to a light source, the softer that those shadows will be, and then the quicker the fall off, so it'll get darker faster on the other side. So that's why it gave that dramatic sort of Rembrandt style lighting, and you can look into that if you don't know what that is. The fourth one, where he's looking up a bit more close, it was again above, and because he was looking almost directly at the octobox, I had the power set to its lowest setting because we don't want to damage any eyes with that firing, so it was set really low because I knew he was going to be looking directly at it or very close to it. And if I jump as well to the very last one, that was a similar situation, but I pushed the power up a little bit higher because it was further away from him. And the one in the middle with my daughter, this one, it was almost directly in front of her at her level. And as a result, the lighting is much more flat, it's much more even. There's not as many shadows on either side. And that will, again, and it also lit up more of the background because she was actually up against the sofa. So there wasn't enough distance between the subject and the background to isolate the subject. So if you want to have that isolated subject with this dramatic lighting, the lighting can be close to your subject, but the subject has to be far enough away from the background in order to darken that out. And that's the flat, more even lighting that you sort of, and it's still pretty catch lights though. I always try, that's the lovely thing about having artificial lighting, is you can guarantee a catch light, which you can't always guarantee with natural lighting. And that's it for me so far. So that's a lot that I've covered, and that's every type really of flash modifier that I can think of off the top of my head. But if you do have any questions about any of it whatsoever, feel free to drop me a message and comment below in the Facebook group if it's been posted in there. The second video to come will go through a little bit more in terms of how I set up my MagMod system, because I use MagMod for my octobox with my speed lights, which means it's basically 2 speed lights in there like a portable strobe. That's the effect it has, and I can take it wherever without any leads or wires. And also my my speed light flash modifiers between my MagSphere and my MagBounce. And that's sort of the main things that I use to really diffuse that light and I think make my job a hell of a lot easier, because I don't need to stress about what environment I'm going into and how I am going to control my light, because I've got it covered. All right, thanks so much for staying with me, and I'm going to sign off. Take care. Bye.